And he said, so, why do you think we should hire you? And I said, okay, so here it is. Like, of course, who says this in an interview? But I said, so my parents are Republican, and I want to know whether or not I'm a Republican. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to come and get a job with you so I could figure it out. And he started laughing. He's just like...
It's such a great response.
I wanted to work there when I got out, and I sent a letter to the managing editor of Fortune magazine, Marshall Loeb, and I said, hi, I'm Kara Keenan is my maiden name. I'm Kara Keenan and graduating, and I'd really love to come work for you. And I'm a great writer, and I would love to meet with you. And he wrote me this very nice letter back. I was sure that it was him that wrote this letter. And I said, and it said, if you're ever in the New York area, definitely let me know. Thought to myself, okay, I'm going to...
He wants to know. Ticket. He's telling me. He says, I want to know when Kara Keenan is in New York.
And I told all my friends, I said, managing editor of Fortune, he wants to meet with me, and I'm going there. So I get there, I walk into the HR department because, of course, that's where you get a job, right?
You show up at the HR.
I walk in the door, the poor receptionist that I can still see her face. I said, hi, I would like to see Marshall Loeb. And she said, do you have an appointment? And I said, I have this letter. I take the letter out, and she's reading the letter, and she's like, so do you have an appointment? And I said, no, I have the letter. And she said, just a minute. She calls the head of HR. She said, can you come out here for a minute? So the woman is like, do you have an appointment? And I said, no, I have this letter. And then she said, wait, so you have a letter, but you never set up an appointment? And I said, no, he said if I'm ever in the New York area.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire. All right, my friends, thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. Today's guest, I have to tell you, the prep and conversations early on were fantastic. Is one of my, I think it's going to be one of the more fun and insightful stories you're going to hear on the podcast, which I think is saying quite a bit. So I hope I nail this. Like me, she spent many years in Phoenix and is a former Sun Devil. So I'm obviously excited about that. In my book, she really defined the word hustle when she showed up in the offices of Time Inc. right out of school with a generic letter from a CEO, and we're going to get into all that. Got an interview, got the job, became an e-commerce wizard, has won too many entrepreneur and business awards to count, and has an amazing book out called Undaunted that I really hope and want everyone to read. So please help me welcome the Hint founder and CEO, Kara Goldin. Kara, welcome.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
Well, I'm very excited for this. And on top of reading the book, I've pulled quite a few different, there's just a lot. Like, we've got a lot to get to. We only have an hour. So we're going to jump right in. And as many of you know, we're focused on telling the stories of what shaped people in their early years to become these moguls that we know them as today. So we're going to jump right in. Kara, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So born in Minneapolis, all right, but moved very early to Scottsdale, where you grew up in Scottsdale. And for all my friends, like for everyone who knows Scottsdale now, it was not that, right? It was not Old Town, right? Or Fashion Square Mall at this point. So tell me a little bit about what it was like, growing up. I know that, you had, working parents and, that worked a majority of that. And so what was like, those first kind of formative years growing up in Scottsdale?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, one of my first memories in Minneapolis was my dad sitting me and my siblings down. We had 5 kids in our family, and I was the last of 5. We were living in Edina, Minnesota, and I remember my dad saying we were having a family meeting. I'm like 3 years old. I'm just, what's a family meeting?
Right.
And, and we're having a family meeting. And so the family meeting was that he bought a house in Scottsdale. And, I'm totally aging myself. I mean, this is like 1970. And Scottsdale was not happening in 1970. I mean, there was we lived on the front side of Camelback Mountain where like the Phoenician is. I mean,
beautiful.
Totally different world. There was the Camelback Inn on the other side, and there were a few houses in Paradise Valley, but not really much going on. And it was, it was just a totally different world. But my poor mom, my mom and dad went to University of Minnesota. She had never been to Arizona. My dad went and bought a house. I mean, it's and he said, I can't shovel snow anymore. And here's my family meeting, slowly eroding. It was going downhill from that moment. And my mom just walked out of the room. And I'm 3, but I'm remembering this whole thing going on. And my dad worked for this company called Armour Food Company. And they had offices in Minneapolis, but they also had a subsidiary in Scottsdale. And when he was going out to Scottsdale, he's like, I got to be here. There's no snow. I don't have to shovel snow when I get home from a, week of working. And so he was in, but I don't know, he forgot to tell my parents.
I love that he just sprung it on your mom too, in front of all of you.
Yeah. And my mom was just my dad was the original madman. I mean, he was we're just going. And so we were okay, we're going. He's it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And my parents both passed away a few years ago. And I say the best thing that I was handed down from my house was these tapes from my dad. Was so smart. When we landed in Phoenix, he turned on a cassette tape recorder, and he said, my mom's name was Kay, and he said to Kay, he's like, what do you think? And she said, these cactuses are horrible. Why would you take me here? And every year he would go back and he'd say, what do you think of it now? And after she's nice. Well, the cactuses have flowers during certain times of year, but I still I don't really like the dust. And, and she would have all these points along the way. Anyway, it was hysterical. But
that's so great.
Yeah, it was awesome. But so move to Phoenix, Scottsdale area. It's that section that I'm talking about. If you know that area it's right on the border. And we were a Scottsdale school district, but we were technically in Phoenix. And it was truly the Wild West. I mean, I remember, I think in school thinking that there were signs up that said what the population was. And I would watch the population of Phoenix and Scottsdale change. And I would watch those signs. And I remember when it hit 100,000.
Wow.
Phoenix, I was like, whoa, 100,000, we made it, and I was so excited. But it was, definitely kind of a unique time for a lot of different reasons. And we almost had 2 different families, even though both the same parents, but my brother and sister are 14 and 15 years older than me. And at the time, I mean, I was the little squirt running around watching, them do their thing. More than anything, I think what I learned is that they had more opportunities than I did. I never equated it necessarily to age as much as I equated it to the fact that they were able to earn money and I wasn't. So, fast forward a few more years, I worked, you mentioned Old Town. I worked at a toy store in Old Town, was my first job when I was 14. And, so it was a crazy time. I wanted to make money and go to the mall, go to Scottsdale Fashion Square and go shopping. And I didn't have any money to do that. And so one day I went into this local toy store, and my mom, I think, was shopping for fabric next door. And I didn't want to shop for fabric. It's so boring to me. And so I walked into the toy store just to kill time. And that's when the person who owned the store, it's called ABC Toy Store, they said, hey, do you want to work here? And I said, sure. And they were like, okay, like on Sunday doing the cash register. And I thought, oh, that'd be so cool if I could do the credit card machine and count money. I mean, and so I got home and told my parents, I'm like, I had a job. And my dad said, do they know you're not 16? And I said, how would they know that? And he said, well, did you show them your driver's license? I'm like, I don't have a driver's license. I'm 14. And he said, so they didn't ask you? And I'm like, no. And he said, okay. So I was just like, eventually they'll find me out and they'll ask me and I guess they'll fire me, but it'd be super cool to learn how to use that credit card machine. Until then, you know, I just thought it'd be really fun. But you know, it was crazy. I mean, I went in to that job thinking, okay, I'm going to go make money. And of course I'm still a kid. So the idea of working in a toy store,
sure.
I was like Tom Hanks, you know, I thought that'd be really cool. And then all of a sudden my curiosity, which I always had, kind of kicked into gear where Nancy, the store owner, asked me to go to a toy buying, event that there was, and you know, after a while she's like, you're better at this than I am, you know which toys to buy. Of course, duh, I'm a kid,
you're the audience.
But there were like a lot of things that I think back on today, including, you know, things like you don't have to have thousands of products to actually, in fact, it's probably better not to have a lot of products because you can focus on things. You know, it's not necessarily the best to be the cheapest, right? There's all these like little things that I think back on that I was gaining so much knowledge from, and also being able to test those theories too. And when I was 14, I mean, wild. It was crazy. And so things like margins, I mean, I'd come home and I'd be like, do you know what a margin is, to my dad? And be like, yeah, I know what a margin is. And, how do you know what margin is? Are they teaching you that in school? And I'm like, no, Nancy's like talking to me about these different categories within the toy industry. And he's like, wow, like that's crazy. And even my brothers were like amazed. They're like, that's crazy what you're learning. And, you know, I was making $8 an hour or something, but I was
$8 an hour. That's not bad.
No, I was happy. I was like, you know, it was, for me, it was just an alternative to babysitting, which I also did too. But anyway, it was an exciting time. And then, you know, when I got a little bit older, I decided I have to get more serious and get a little more professional. And this guy, John McCain, who was a big guy in Arizona, and I thought maybe I can get an internship, because an internship will look really good on my resume for college. And so
this is in high school still, right?
Yep. Still in high school
you're doing this.
And so I applied and got an interview with the office. And I remember, you know, I talk about it. One of the stories in the book is that John interviewed me he always interviewed everybody in the office.
It's a great story, by the way. So I'm glad you're telling it.
There's a few stories from my time there, but it's, I had passed the test, I guess, and got through the interview stage. And then I got to John and he said, so, you know, why do you think we should hire you? And I said, okay, so here it is. Like, of course, who says this in an interview? But I said, so my parents are Republican and I want to know whether or not I'm a Republican. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to come and get a job with you so I could figure it out. And he started laughing. He's just like...
It's such a great response. It's such a great response.
And of course I didn't prep. I mean, to like say this or anything. I just am like, what the heck. And so he just starts laughing and, you know, he said, okay, you can come and work with us. And this is when he was in the House of Representatives. It was before he became senator. But, you know, that was another thing where I didn't think that hard about it. People are like, did you want to get into government? Did you always know you wanted to work in Washington or what was like your thinking and there? And I'm like, no. I mean, I think for me, what I've wanted to do more than anything is just enjoy life and learn along the way. And wherever I have had curiosity, I've started to dig in. Because I think that that's the thing, that if you follow your curiosity, so often even if you decide not to continue doing it, you learn along the way. And
do you feel,
that's for me. Yeah.
I love it. Do you feel like what fueled that? I mean, you're talking about, this is like, your first few, you're getting a job at 14, right? Mm-hmm. You talk about wanting to have some of your own money and your curiosity and then obviously taking a role like this. And did you, I wasn't sure. Did you move away from home too during this period, like to live with your sister?
Well, that's a funny story that my kids still are like scratching their head about.
I want to hear about that one too.
Yeah. So my dad, it's a crazy story. I'm trying to figure out how to succinctly set this up. So when I was in high school, when I was a junior, I guess I had a role with John. I think I had just gotten my job with John right before all this happened, but my dad had actually been out of work for 2 years. So here was a guy that had, when he was at Armour Food Company, he had developed a frozen food line called Dinner Classics. And then when he moved to Arizona with Armour, he was a product manager for Dinner Classics. Dinner Classics then became this brand called Healthy Choice, which you may have heard of. And then they were acquired by Con-Agra. And so, he's sort of this like misfit entrepreneur, as I call him a frustrated entrepreneur, misfit entrepreneur living inside of a large company. And he'd come home and, complain about, this and this. And we'd be like, you should just start your own thing. Cause he always had these like side hustle ideas that he had, and he never did them. Because he was really, really loyal to this, large company, and so it was shocking on many fronts to watch him get laid off, because that never was supposed to happen. I remember very clearly when he came home to say that he was laid off, and the reason he's laid off is that he didn't have an MBA. And so the 80s, I'm still waiting for the CNN series that comes on that talks about the 80s, that talks about this in business. If you didn't have an MBA, then you were cut. It didn't matter how old you were. And my dad was in his, late 50s, and it was just, it was hard. And I watched it, and we never expected, and we were always super middle class and, nothing like above middle class, but we were doing fine. And then all of a sudden we weren't doing fine, and we had to really tighten our belt. And my brothers and sisters, a couple of them were off, out of college. At this point, my other brother and sister were in college, and they had to, figure out how to take student loans and, get jobs so they could stay in college and whatever. So I'm home, I'm in high school, and my dad's interviewing with lots of different companies, and it's not going anywhere. And finally, another really important lesson that I learned just going through this was one of his suppliers that was a shrimp fisherman, actually a group of shrimp fishermen off the coast of Georgia, St. Simon's Island. He had been friends with them. He always said, hey, if you know of any jobs that are out there, please let me know. You're supplying for a lot of these companies. And finally, they all kind of got together and said, we don't like the idea that they're buying from us, and we don't have MBAs. We don't even have college degrees, and they like dinged you. So maybe we shouldn't sell to them. So they stopped selling. The supplier for my dad was like, don't do that. Like, you have to like feed your family and whatever. And they're like, no. We want to like this. There's this big wave that's going on right now, and we have to like send a big message that that's not okay to do that to like our people. And I was like, okay, well, hope that works. Like, I was just sitting there as a high school kid, just watching this whole thing go down. And then suddenly, Con-Agra called my dad back, and they said, we want you to come back. Like, we need the shrimp. Wow. And we need the shrimp. We got to have the shrimp. The importance of supplier relationships. Yeah. Right. And it's really it's a story about people, and about people buy from companies, but they also buy from people. Yeah. And I think that there's a trust that goes on, and, all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, my dad gets his job back at Con-Agra, but part of the stipulation was that he had to move to Omaha, Nebraska. And so growing up in Scottsdale, and he was, loved playing golf. He got the hang of it. His kids were all happy at a house. All of a sudden, he was like, I guess I got to go to Omaha, Nebraska, but I don't want to disrupt
you and what you're
life.
going through. Yeah.
I've already disrupted your, older.
At least he just didn't pull you into a room again, right? Like there wasn't like another.
No more family meeting. There was only me there. He called my brothers and sisters, whatever, to tell them. But anyway, so he was moving to Omaha, Nebraska with my mom, and my mom was a little more go with the flow at this point because they just, she was scared. Right? Like she didn't have any more severance left, and they knew that they needed to do something, and they didn't have enough money to just retire. And he wasn't getting his pension unless he went back. I mean, a lot of things that you're just, I was scratching my head, said, well, so much for, companies that are loyal and, and if you're loyal back, it'll all be fine, because it just wasn't. So that's when he said, look, the house hasn't been sold, and so you should just stay here. And I was like, okay, that's fine. You're
How
in high
old are you
school.
at this time? How old are you?
So I was 17. I mean, I'm like, okay, like, sounds good. I'm not 18, but I was 17. And the funniest thing was, I remember going to school because I thought, well, maybe I have to get like some paperwork from my high school. Maybe they should actually know so that I don't even know why I thought this, so that I don't get in trouble for like not having parents around, or, I mean, they're available by phone, but they're going to be living up in Omaha, Nebraska. And as I was doing it, they were looking at my paperwork, and I'll never forget, they said, you should really talk to your counselor. And I said, oh, okay. Talking to my counselor, he's like, so do you want to graduate? And I said, of course I want to graduate. I mean, I'm sharing with you that I'm going to be living alone in the house. And he said, but you have enough credits to graduate. And I said, wait, what? I had no idea. And so in Arizona, in high school, if you talk to anybody who, and I think this still happens in Arizona, but because it's so hot there, a lot of people just take summer school because you want to stay inside, right? You just like don't know what else to do because it's so damn hot during the summer. I don't know if it's like this in Texas, but it's like summer school is like a normal thing and again, I did it because where the parties were on weekends, and you'd get to meet new people, like all the different high schools in the Scottsdale School District would get together. And I still know so many people from the different high schools just because we were in summer school classes together. Anyway, so I had enough credits to graduate at the end of junior year, 3 years, and I wasn't a brainiac or anything. It was just because I had taken these summer school classes. So I graduated technically, but I never told my parents that I wasn't going to school. I just and then I was kind of bored. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go take classes. So that's when we sold our house. Finally, it lasted for a couple of months that I was living on my own. And then our house sold, and then I moved down to Tempe. My sister was going to ASU, and so I moved down there, and then she was with me for like a minute, and then she moved into the sorority building, and so she left me. And then I got some of my friends from high school to come move in with me, who their parents had divorced, and they didn't like their step parents, and so
they're still a senior in high school, and they're living with you.
No, and it was crazy. Actually, one was 16, and I mean, my kids are still like, wait, like, did your parents hate you?
They're like, that
something?
sounds amazing. They're like, this sounds amazing.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I mean, I went to John McCain's office. I was also I had a job like a couple days a week, or really like more like a day a week at a hair salon, because I thought maybe I want to be a hairdresser. Like for a minute, I thought I wanted to be a hairdresser, and then I got really into the scheduling at the front desk and sort of understanding how that whole thing, like how to schedule people for an hour versus an hour and a half, and who was really good, and who, like if somebody said, put me with some hairdresser that's really good, then I'd be like, okay, all right, I know who to get. Like, you have no idea, but I learned this whole new world that existed. And again, for me, it was just a lot of fun and all about learning and crazy time.
That's wild. Yeah. I mean, I read the book, but I don't know if I remember all of this, which is good. So you can get some additional insights here, which is great. So then you end up going to ASU, right? So you've had this drive, right? Obviously, look, you are, I mean, gosh, the maturity of just like doing these things. Like, what do you think? I mean, before we jump into kind of college years and then get into kind of professional what do you, when you look back, again, your parents were working, right? Like you said, they're working for companies but you have this, like curiosity and spirit and want to work and not view it. I mean, it seems like even hearing you describe it, you're not even describing necessarily as work as like learning and growing, et cetera. Like where do you think that comes from? Or where, do you think that parts of that like were fostered?
So I think even writing the book is somehow therapeutic, right? Where it helps you like even think about how you got there and how you think about, why did you become this person? I mean, it's funny because I always thought that my dad, just having come from the food industry, I mean, ultimately then I got into not food, but beverages, close, not exactly, but that sort of thing as a mentorship and really teaching me, quite a bit. And I did learn a lot from him. But my mom, when we moved to Arizona, she was an art history major. And it's funny, I didn't learn this until even years later while she was still alive. But the fact that she was in the Midwest and came from, a small town just outside of Minneapolis, and the fact that during those years in 1940s, she's going to college to be a woman in the Midwest, not from a lot of money, and the fact that she even went to the University of Minnesota. I mean, it was a bold move. Most people were getting married, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a time of war. It was like there were a lot of things going on during that time. And so I would just be so curious about, how did you do it? And she said, I just wanted to. Like, I always wanted art. She was an art history major. And so she was always curious about museums and about, the backstories of so many different artists. And so anyway, when she was an art history major, when she came to Arizona, she decided to substitute teach. So she was teaching mostly to get to know people. When I was in preschool, she would go and, teach some art classes at the local schools. And I think after a while, maybe like art history versus actually teaching art, she didn't love it.
Yeah.
Like she had just it's just different. And she just didn't feel like people could really kind of understand what she loved about art as much. Instead, it was like, okay, let's paint.
Yeah, let's get on with this, right?
And she was always doing projects. Like we had a kiln at our house that, we made stained glass. I mean, she was constantly doing stuff along the way. And so we always had this creativity going. But suddenly, she just totally switched gears when I went to kindergarten. She said, I want to be in fashion. And we were like, wait, what? Well, you're going to be in fashion? And she said, yeah, I'm going to go and work in a department store. And so she worked up at Scottsdale Fashion Square. There used to be the store called Goldwater's. And so she was like, I'm going to figure out how to be a buyer and I'm going to do this. And, that is from my lens, I said, okay, like she just totally switched. I mean, my dad must have been like, huh, okay, all right. She's good at this and now she wants to go do this. And so she was doing that. But the thing that was most interesting to me is that while she was doing this, she didn't want to give up her love of art and sort of what she loved about art. So she started this program in the Scottsdale School District, which basically took all of what she really loved about art, the backstory and the history, and then taught people in sort of like a cheat sheet how to recognize different artists. So she took like Matisse and Renoir and Picasso and the classics, and basically this is how you go recognize them. And she went and sold this program into principals. And she said, can I come into, after school program at lunch or whatever? And people would come in and they would hear her talk about this, and then she would make them create their own Matisse, create their own Picasso. And then they would put this little booklet together. And I mean, all ages, from kindergarten to like 6th grade, they would come and they would make these books, and they just love learning. And one of the best things that I got when she passed away at her funeral was people coming back telling me that story. And they said, to this day, I know what a Picasso looks like because of your mom. Like, your mom actually simplified things just by telling me the backstory and the stuff that I remember about art. Like, they were like, I've been to one museum in my life or whatever.
Right.
It's because of that. And I just thought, that's the thing, that your journey, no matter what you do, you pick as you go on in your journey, you can start to pick the things that you really like about it. And she never gave up art, and she was always really into the projects, but she really liked more of the fashion side. She loved being around more people. She loved, the communication of fashion and whatever. But I think that learning that you can recreate yourself, learning that being in one industry doesn't mean that you have to stay in it forever, learning that you have to have if you decide to have a spouse, you have to have a supportive spouse that wants you to grow and wants you to do what you're passionate about. Like, all that kind of stuff, I think are things that I picked up a lot from my mom.
Yeah, and you can see it plays out even in these years. And so I know we've got a little bit of time left, so I want to go forward a little bit to, I really thought that this was a fantastic kind of build on some of the things we've already talked about, which is, so you're in college and you're waiting tables at the TP, right? You're waiting tables, and there's one of the chapters is called Create Your Own Opportunities. And for me, and again, that's why I think the book is so, great and powerful too, is there's just a lot of really practical, kind of real life versus theory. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of the create your own opportunities, and maybe just talk a little bit about, how you leveraged your experience there to ending up, as I mentioned in the very beginning, in New York at Time, and, kind of jumping into the professional world. Cause I think it's a good example of how, you can make things happen no matter where you are. And so maybe you can share a few of the stories from your experience there, and then how you ended up at Time.
Well, so I'm waiting tables at Teepee Restaurant, which is still the best Mexican, I think, that's out there. I'm like craving it now that I'm talking about it as we speak. But it was this guy used to come in all the time into the restaurant, and that, I guess when you're graduating from college and the elders are always asking you, like, what are you going to do when you graduate? It's that thing that you're not supposed to ask college kids, but you do anyway. And that was, me as a waitress. Everybody knew I was going to school and whatever. And this guy kept coming in to the restaurant, and I knew he did something in business. He wasn't there all the time, but he didn't seem like he was always there with other people. He liked Mexican food, so he came in, whatever. And so he asked me that question. He said, "Oh, you graduating now? Like, you've been going to school for a while?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." And then I just said, "What do you do?" Because I thought, he asked me that question, why can't I ask him that question? I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I work for Anheuser-Busch, and I'm in product placement." Now, I'm a college kid. I know what Anheuser-Busch is. And I'm like, you place product? Like, where do you place product? And he said, on movie sets. And I said, I'm in. Can you get me a job like that? I mean, of course. And we're kind of joking around. He's eating his enchilada, and I said, "Wow, that sounds awesome. Like, where do you even start to get a job like that?" And he said, "Well, I can get you an interview if you like." And I said, "Really? Placing beer on movie sets? It sounds amazing." And so he said, "Just let me know. Like, the interview's in LA. That's easy enough for me to get to LA from Arizona." So once I figured out when I was going to LA, I thought, maybe I should ask more people what they do, and maybe they'll be willing to set me up with jobs with their companies. And so then anyone who came across my path, not just in Tempe, but also my dad's friends, I was like, okay, who do you know in LA? And then I'd find them and I'd say, do you know anybody who'd hire somebody who's really eager? I hustle, I'm smart. Doesn't have to be fancy. It can be any entry level job, but I'm in. And they'd say, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I'm a college student. I have no idea what I want to do. I want to work with really nice, really smart people in a fun organization. So I led with that. And then I said yes over and over again. So, I mean, everything from, I wasn't wedded to Los Angeles. In fact, I didn't even think about LA until this guy said, oh, the job is out in LA. And then as I was talking to people, they were like, oh, actually, I work in LA, but the home office is in Chicago. And so I'm like, I'll move to Chicago. I've met people in Chicago. Chicago's cool. I'll go there. So all of a sudden, all these people kept opening up their Rolodex, and I made this tour for myself over the course of the next month. And that
still going to college at this time? So you're still in classes?
No, I graduated. Okay. I graduated, and then I made this tour. And so I had, before I left, I think I had like 65 interviews set up, which was unbelievable. As I was doing it, and I didn't consciously do this, but I go to I remember I'm in San Francisco, and they're walking you out of the interview, and they said, where are you off to next? And I wouldn't hold back. I'd be like, oh, I'm actually going to Chicago tomorrow. And they're like, oh, does your family live there? I'm like, no, I've never been to Chicago. I'm interviewing. And they're like, who are you interviewing with? And I'm like, oh, I have an interview at McKinsey and also at this vacuum cleaner company. They're like, wow, that's really different. I'm like, I know. I'm just trying to figure it out, And they're like, where are you staying? And I said, oh, my friend's parents live there, and I'm going to stay with them. And I always had enough money to buy a plant for them or something I make the bed and, be gracious and stuff. But anyway, the net of it is at the end of the month, I had over 90 interviews, and it was insane. And finally, the last interview that I had was at Time Magazine, but I didn't start out thinking that it was going to be at Time Magazine.
That's right.
I was a journalism major with a minor in finance from Arizona State University, and I wanted to work for Fortune magazine because I loved my Fortune magazine and my Wall Street Journal, and I learned so much from Fortune magazine on how to simplify finance into a way that I could understand. And so anyway, I wanted to work there when I got out, and I sent a letter to the managing editor of Fortune magazine, Marshall Loeb, and I said, hi, I'm Kara Keenan is my maiden name. I'm Kara Keenan and graduating, and I'd really love to come work for you. And I'm a great writer, and I would love to meet with you. And he wrote me this very nice letter back. I was sure that it was him that wrote this letter. And I said, and it said, if you're ever in the New York area, definitely let me know. And so I said, I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to
he wants to know. Ticket. He's telling me. He says, I want to know when Kara Keenan is in New York.
And I told all my friends, I said, managing editor of Fortune, he wants to meet with me, and I'm going there. I don't know when I'm going there, but I'm going there. And so that was my last stop. So I get there. I walk into the HR department because, of course, that's where you get a job, right?
Everybody you show up at the HR. I just think, I would just everybody think about that right now. Imagine someone so determined. It's in today's world, and Kara, you might feel this way too. Hired. Hired immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. You see me coming in. I have my Kelly green suit on that they wore in Arizona that they didn't wear in New York City at all. I mean, it was there were so many things that were going on at that moment. But anyway, I walk in the door, the poor receptionist that I can still see her face. I said, hi, I would like to see Marshall Loeb. And she said, do you have an appointment? And I said, I have this letter. I take the letter out, and she's reading the letter, and she's like, so do you have an appointment? And I said, no, I have the letter. And she said, just a minute. So she calls the head of HR. She said, can you come out here for a minute? So the woman is like, do you have an appointment? I said, no, I have this letter. And then she said, wait, so you have a letter, but you never set up an appointment? And I said, no, he said if I'm ever in the New York area. So this is like
so good
circle, right?
It's so good.
And so finally she just said, we don't hire people right out of college. You really need to have experience. And I'm sure Mr. Loeb was just like trying to let you down. And I mean, I'm just staring at her, just thinking, and then what do I say? I'm like, oh, well, I'm going home tomorrow. I've been on a tour for the last month interviewing with a bunch of companies, but this was really my first choice. And I don't know. I mean, there has to be other magazines in this building. Is there anybody else hiring while I'm here? And she said, really? And I said, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm already here, so maybe there's somebody else. And she said, what do you think about Time magazine? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that sounds great. And she said, so there's this role as an executive assistant in circulation. I didn't know what circulation was. And you may not know what circulation is those stupid little blow-in insert cards that fall out of magazines.
Oh, right.
And I was not even responsible for the blow-in, insert cards. I was the executive assistant for that group, but I was like, okay, I'm in. I had no idea what they did. Still didn't, even the first day that I actually got the job and walked in. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing, but I was so happy to be in New York City, and I was in Time and Life Building, working for Time magazine and circulation. And I'm like, I'm in. And, but it's the funny story about that, which is like an add-on that you won't read in my book, is that I sent the book, a preview copy of my book Undaunted, to Marshall Loeb. To Michael Loeb, Marshall's son. And he was at the time, he was friends with my boss, and he was at Sports Illustrated and later went on to be the founder of Entertainment Weekly. And he's this awesome guy. And anyway, we've stayed in touch a bit, and I sent him a preview copy, and I said, by the way, you should read this part about your dad who passed away a few years ago, and you'll probably get it. He knew the story, but I said, you'll probably get a kick out of it. And he reread it, and he sent me a note back, and he said, by the way, Marshall did write that letter to you. And that was a common thing that he did. He wanted to write those notes to people. And oftentimes people never called him to actually do the interview, but he probably would have done the interview.
Right.
And I thought it was a really, really powerful, closing to that I didn't have when I actually wrote that book. But, I think the moral of the story there is really, you just never know. And I think years later, as Steve Jobs used to famously say, the dots eventually connect. Not only the people you meet, but the things that you do. Circulation to me is kind of the backbones to direct to consumer in so many ways, about understanding customer and loyalty and churn and all those things I learned in that first job at Time magazine. So it truly was part of my journey and meant to be. And anyway, I think it is a story for
It's I think it's just an awesome one. I didn't know it was 96 interviews in 1 month. And how, let me ask you this, how many of those, just for people listening, were like you, like applying for something versus you networking?
Probably about, I would say half of them were networking. Yeah. And I actually, I think that the one thing that I didn't look at any of these interviews as they're going to teach me something about them and convince me. Instead, I went in, and it was harder to research companies back then.
I can imagine.
Library and stuff.
Yeah. Like Dewey Decimal System, you're like reading books. And for those of you who don't know, you can Google it.
And you try and talk to people and figure stuff out as much as you could. And they were all different industries, because I was open to doing whatever. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like so many college students, you don't really learn what the jobs are, or the titles, or, the industries or anything like that. And so I just was, I would just go in and I'd ask a lot of questions, but I'd also, things like, so when you think about competition, I mean, what scares you? Like I'd have these like open-ended questions and again, they weren't things that, they were really things that I was super curious about. And, even going into like McKinsey, they would say, well, you mean like, who are the other consulting firms? And I'm like, no, I know about Bain and I know about, some of the other ones that are out there, but where do you think you're like lacking? And, I would ask these questions that just showed curiosity. And, to your point, that's who you want to hire.
Yeah.
Right? Great managers want to hire people that help them think.
Yeah. I think most people, and I hope too, it's just that creating these opportunities and understanding that you can, even for people interviewing, that's such a tactical kind of tip about showing up prepared, right? That so many people today just, show up and the job market's so hot, where it's about you're finding out the right opportunity for yourself. And I think that's another kind of takeaway from reading your story. And, hearing you talk through it is about finding what's right for you, which ended up being completely different,
Totally.
It was an executive assistant role at time versus, placing the cool job to tell your friends about, right? That your parents are, time working for Time is pretty cool too. My wife actually worked for Time for 5 years too. So I've been to that. Yeah, I've been to that building a few times.
And you know what was so crazy? I'll tell you one more thing because I know you got to wrap this up. Is that when I was starting Hint, and I had gotten an email from Time Magazine, and they didn't even know the story that I had come from the magazine industry. They just had seen this drink and, taken on the beverage industry and taken on Big Sugar. And we had made a splash in a few other publications. So somebody reached out to me and said, hey, I heard, actually it was at Time. And then they were actually doing work for Fortune magazine as well, which was ironic. And so I'm sitting in this room in the Time and Life building, and it was I remember sitting in the room where all the sandwiches were that all the big people went in, and here I was like being interviewed, for
they're bringing sandwiches for you now.
They're bringing sandwiches in.
You got the sandwiches now.
And I'm kind of laughing, to myself. And then finally, this woman, Patty Sellers, she just recently left Fortune magazine, but she is the founder of Most Powerful Women conference, and she was actually an editor at Fortune, and she popped in for a second. She was like, "Oh, I've had Hint, and I love it. I heard you were coming in. I just wanted to meet you." And she said, "So what'd you do before this?" And I said, "You mean like where'd I start my career?" And she was like, "Yeah, where'd you start your career?" And I was like, "Here." And she's like, "What do you mean? You wrote for?" And I said, "No, you guys wouldn't hire me." And she said, "Wait, what? Wait, back up." And so I told her the whole story, and she's like, "Stop it. Like you, like Marshall Loeb." And so I told her this whole story, and full circle. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, along the way, I was a Most Powerful Women entrepreneur, and like, so she's still like, whenever we're in circles together, she's still laughing. She was like, I still laugh, like my jaw dropped. You're the CEO of Hint Water, and you're running around telling everybody I was an executive assistant. I I was making $23,000 a year. I told all the executives to save their sandwiches, their half of their sandwich for me, so I could, eat during the week because I was making no money and I had to pay my rent. And everybody just was like, still like scratching their head trying to figure out why I would like admit all of that. And I'm like, do you think these executives don't know that you make $23,000 a year as a starting salary? I mean, everyone does when you're starting there. So it was a
I love
story.
it. Well, we're going to have to do a part 2. I'm already convinced. We're going to have to do part 2 where we go deeper on. But I think it's good because, look, I could read about the Hint story, in a lot of places. And I think what my hopeful for takeaway here is hopefully as well, too, I'm going to kind of wrap up with kind of a final question about what's next for you. But I'm serious, everyone. Go check out the book. I've got it right here, Undaunted. Just a really amazing story. I love that we got to go into some deeper on some of the topics as well too about the things that shaped you, and that's what this podcast is really all about, which is you can find out about the Hint story in a lot of places. And I still want to go into it. And plus, like most people too, it's like you were also like pretty good at e-com back in the day, right? You built out $1 billion e-com business before Hint, which I think a lot of people probably don't know, either. So there's a lot more layers to you, Kara, that I want to, go deeper on. But as you think about where you're at now, what's new and exciting for you? You've been a part of many people who've reinvented themselves many times. Even as Hint water has grown into sunscreen and the Hint brand. By the way, Hint sunscreen, we talked about this before, is fantastic. If you haven't tried Hint sunscreen, I highly recommend it. Our kids love it too. What's new and exciting for you? What's the next challenge?
Well, I think we've been building this company for 16 years, and people have, said it's like I was way ahead of where this consumer was, the consumer who didn't really understand that diet sweeteners were not so great for them. And 16 years ago when I started drinking Hint, I mean, it was really, I would share with people, I gave up drinking diet soda, and this helped me drink something besides plain water, which was so boring. And it took a while, frankly, and that's what happens when you start not only a new company, but when you're the only one in the space and a new category. You have to, as I share with entrepreneurs, you got to stay alive, right, along the way, and you got to wait for the consumer to catch up to where you were at. I mean, fast forward. I mean, we're a few $100 million business. We're now profitable. We're we really built it one bottle at a time. We've survived 2008, 2009 financial crisis, now a pandemic. I mean, we're, all of these things that we had never, done. And so I don't think any of that, I don't think the plans have changed at all. I think that just because of our growth, I mean, our direct-to-consumer business tripled over the last 18 months. Our overall growth is over 50%. In the last 18 months. So it's an exciting time for the brand, and, we're continuing and probably known a little even more so as somebody that is, we're the largest independent private company today, that beverage company that doesn't have a relationship with Coke, Pepsi, or Dr. Pepper Snapple. And, that wasn't ever a goal, but it's like, pretty crazy,
to nice.
Sit back and think about it. And so, whether I think more than likely this company ends up going public at some point, because we do have investors. So it was never my dream to run a public company or help a company go public, but I'm game. And it's exciting, and I believe in what I'm doing, and I really believe I'm on the right side of health and of, helping people get healthy during a time that is so confusing for so many, especially coming out of this nutty last 18 months. So it's exciting and a lot of work too. So that's one other thing that I'll say just on the book, that I wanted to get it out there for entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, that I always say to entrepreneurs, there's way easier ways to make money.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you could waitress at Tempe and make more money versus what some people are, going and they think they're going to be the next unicorn and, get their next Tesla. And I mean, there's a lot of steps in between, and you gotta, make the right chess moves along the way too, or you'll have a lot of failures. And, and what I try and share in the book too, and hopefully it comes across as you can still get back up from your challenges. You just have to figure out how not to freeze, or when to slow down, or when to pivot along the way. Like, all those things are so critical. And I love, to your point on your show too, it's like telling the stories of how people got there is that's the best part, because so often we hear the end, whether
That's
it's
right.
a failure or bankruptcy or, you know, there's
that gets glossed over. Then it's back to like, and then they made $1 billion, right? And then
and it's never that. And I think for me, I've always been curious and wanted to know the digging along the way, like what created them, like what bad moves did they make along the way. That's what makes it all that more interesting. And hopefully people can learn from those things and either not become an entrepreneur, frankly, or go and try it and know that, you know, you can do it, but it's not the easiest route. Is it rewarding? Sure. Do you learn a lot about yourself? Do you learn about how, you know, resilience and all those things? Absolutely. But it's not for everyone to be an entrepreneur. I think there's way too many people that think that it's super easy and it's,
you just go raise money and then, you know, it just happens. Like it all works out. There's there's this thing called payroll when you're a private company and other things that come up.
Totally. I get it.
I know you do. Well, Kara, look, I just want to say a big thank you. I'm serious. We're going to do a part 2. We'll wait a few months. We'll do a part 2 because I really feel like we kind of scratched the surface a bit, but I think we got to the core of a lot of the things. And like I said, everyone, please go check out the book Undaunted. It really is a easy, great, learning, entertaining read. I don't know if that's if you put that in quotes or not, but it's an easy book to read the storytelling is fantastic. So Kara, I really enjoyed the book. Everyone go check it out. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll see everyone next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well, too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.